thanks for tuning in. I'm Jordan Green, and you're watching On Track, a weekly look at the biggest news in railroading. Now, rail traffic has been affected by the pandemic like anything else, but traffic on the nation's railways has also been on a tumultuous ride in the first weeks of 2022. So, in just a week's time, the industry trends flip flop from being on the low side to being on the high side. Overall rail traffic in the U.S. for the week ending February 5th was 458,152 carloads, down roughly 7.6% from the first week in 2021. That figure also includes intermodal units, according to a report by trade publication Railway Age. That drop is no small figure. Let's break it down. Railway Age reported that 8 of 10 commodity groups posted traffic declines, but 2 of them saw slight increases. Those that declined included motor vehicles, motor vehicle parts, grain and petroleum, among others. The 2 that saw gains were coal and chemicals. Both were up slightly. Railway Age's data comes from the American Association of Railroads, better known as the AAR. And the agency's February 12th report was quite different and a whole lot better. That week, railroads reported an 11.9% increase in total carloads. 7 of the 10 commodity groups saw increases compared to 2021, including some that hadn't seen recent gains. Overall, for the year so far, traffic is down about 0.8%, the AAR reported. Now, while the week ending February 12th does seem more positive than the week ending February 5th, some slight gains aren't enough to reverse a trend we've been seeing for years. Overall, rail has been losing its grip on the transportation market for decades. It continues to move less and less of the nation's goods, with more companies increasingly turning to trucking. Business Insider started talking about these problems as far back as 2016, with one writer saying, to deal with these significant market uncertainties, as the AAR put it, railroads have been cutting costs. They're laying off people. They're slashing investments. They're working on efficiencies, such as increasing train speeds, given the reduced traffic, particularly of slower-moving oil trains. But those solutions have had their own negative consequences. Most Class 1 railroads, which are the biggest ones, have made being a customer pretty hard. Larger railroads don't want to spend the money to serve smaller industries, and even some bigger ones. Also, they're running late more frequently, causing customers delays that impact their finances. That makes people disenfranchised with railroads and decide to ship by trucking, where a plethora of companies and independent drivers are ready, willing, and able to pick up their loads on time. Railroads created this problem decades ago, mostly starting in the 1980s when they began closing smaller railroad lines. Not only did this reduce carloads, but it was the start of a new attitude in railroading that opposed small businesses. Railroads simply don't want to be bothered switching cars at smaller businesses because they'd rather be moving freight fast on trains coast to coast. But ultimately, in that mission, railroads have lost sight of the fact that smaller industries contribute to bigger ones and more carloads. Without smaller companies, overall rail traffic will decrease, and so will revenue. There's an old joke that the railroad is its own worst enemy. That couldn't be truer. With new management philosophies that encourage eliminating crews and running longer trains, customers have complained more than ever before about poor railroad service. That's been on display at the Surface Transportation Board, where regulators have been heavily weighing complaints by customers against railroads. The STB holds significant power over the nation's railroads, and if railroads get on their bad side again, as they have been before, look out for new regulations. You know, the regulation that formerly was imposed by the STB were really, really strict, and in the 1980s we started seeing those regulations reduced and released. That's partly why railroads started cutting off some of these smaller branch lines they said they couldn't turn a profit on. But the problem that bred was that they began cutting off customers, and like we've talked about, it led into this new style of management that all we want to do is run fast trains long distances. But again, it contributed overall to worse customer service, and right now customers from across the nation are complaining to the STB about how poor railroad service has gotten. Car dwell time has increased dramatically, and train speeds are actually slower than ever. This is a problem, and the railroad solutions through the years have really only exacerbated it. The pandemic hasn't helped railroads either, but it has merely compounded problems that existed before, mostly stemming from poor management. I think that if we had true railroaders running our nation's railroads, not CEOs, not business people with business degrees, I'm talking actual engineers and conductors and train masters and yard masters who have done this kind of work all their lives and know how to move freight efficiently, I think we could see this begin to reverse this trend of lower train traffic, and I think our railroads could experience somewhat of an economic revival. But that's going to take time, and it's probably not ever going to happen. But again, we can always hold out hope, and as always, we can believe that cooler and wiser heads will prevail. Thanks for tuning into this episode of On Track. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to us on YouTube at NWTV7 and on Twitch. I'm Jordan Green, and let's get back on the rails. See you next time.